BK on the job. What do you think? 301-230-0980. More expert opinions coming over the next hour. But your calls as well. Get some reaction from the fans. And let's start off with Don. Don, thanks for calling. Thanks for holding. You are on the Hoffman Show. What do you think of the Wizards hiring Brian Keefe?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Craig. Look, I'm one of the few callers that you're ever going to hear say that the Wiz are my 1A and the Commanders are my 1B. So I've been following this team for a long time. I kind of expected this to be the hire. And the reason why I kind of expected it to be the hire is because it fits in with everything that's been said by Ava Wallace, by what you outlined earlier, and what they seem to be trying to do. They were looking for a coach who is going to come in and is going to build a foundation, teach fundamentals, establish a culture of discipline, establish a culture of defense, which we haven't seen in I don't know how long. As a matter of fact, I think the only coach this team has hired previously it was like Randy Whitman. I see a lot of similarities in their coaching demeanor and what we can expect from him as the full-time guy. The only concern that I have is, one, I'd really like to know what the terms of the contract are. And the other thing I'd like to know is who is going to support this guy in terms of what kind of staff is going to be able to put together. Because when you're working with these youngsters like they're going to be working with for the next 2 to 3 years, you got to bring in some teachers. And I hope that he's going to be allowed to, and I'm pretty sure that Winger and Dawson are going to do this, bring in some quality assistant coaches to assist him. Because it's going to be 2 to 3 years before we see any type of major product on the court.
No doubt about it. Don, great call, and appreciate you holding on to give us your take. Keefe knows a lot of people, as Ava just talked about. This dude's been around the league for 16 years. He's been a part of some of the best organizations who have won a lot. And what that means is, like, if you're the seventh guy on a crap staff that gets fired, it's real hard to get another job, right? Because you're the seventh guy on a crap staff. But what happens is, if you're the seventh guy on a good staff, you probably get elevated to the sixth guy, the fifth guy, because people above you get hired. And maybe even you get hired to go be the fifth guy somewhere else, or the fourth guy, because you go from behind the bench to being on the bench, right? And so as those coaches go elsewhere that are Oklahoma City guys specifically, but also, some of the Knicks coaches from 14 to 16, and Brooklyn had a couple of good years that he was a part of some good staffs. Like there's going to be guys that are out there that have been around a lot of winning, that have a lot of experience, that are still in the league, but maybe they got caught on the wrong staff last year and they got fired. Or they were the sixth guy when Keefe was the seventh guy, and now they're the third guy somewhere else, and Keefe has climbed the ladder faster, and they're kind of stuck, and they can come be the number two guy here, and they're a really good coach. Like, these are the kinds of things that happen when you're a part of good organizations is, or, by the way, maybe the third guy when Keefe was the seventh guy is now the head guy somewhere else, and he's got a fourth guy that's ready to be a third guy. You always got to have a guy. Point is, the more people you know in a successful organization as they spread out throughout the league. And I've even seen this, like, I think of the people I know in the NFL because I covered Sean and Kevin. Nevertheless, the folks that have been here long enough to cover Kyle. Like, if you covered Kyle Shanahan in that 2013 team, like, you now know 5 NFL head coaches because you knew Mike McDaniel when he was the assistant to the whatever, and LaFleur when he was the assistant to the whatever. Like, Keim knows so many people around the league, in part just because he's been here so long, and even though Commanders haven't even won, that staff is spread out and spread its wings, and then you get introduced to new people because hey, great to see you, John. This is my assistant, whoever, said Kyle Shanahan. And that person goes on to be a head coach and whatever. So point is, Keefe is going to have options. He knows a lot of people. He definitely needs to bring in great staff. But I do think one thing that I'll give Leonsis credit for is when he hired Winger, he empowered Michael and thus Will and thus who they hire to hire those people. Like, the budget, it exists, but I don't think it's going to be an issue, which is nice. And I don't know that it was necessarily the way things were done in the past. Let's go to Mello. Mello, what you feel about this hire of Brian Keefe as the Wizards' next head coach?
Hey, Craig, thanks for taking my call. So appreciate my first time calling.
Appreciate that.
I'm not as excited as the last caller. Some of the things the last caller said I was thinking of in terms of teaching these young guys how to play and things of that nature. We're talking about professional players. I wonder why Mark Jackson was never considered. He may have been considered, but Unseld had the same kind of reputation, knowing a lot of people in the league. You see where that got him. I'm just not as optimistic, and I'm very concerned that we constantly go on this Ferris wheel of hope, and we end up in the same space.
I mean, let me ask
really
you.
Not excited about it. Hmm?
Here's the thing, though. So you mentioned Mark Jackson, right? And this is a name that's come up a lot. And Mark Jackson hasn't worked as a coach in the league since 2013. That doesn't scare you more than a guy who is getting his first shot at it?
Well, nobody's scared of J.J. Redick, and he's never coached at all.
Right, but he's never
been
coached. That's my point, is Mark did. He got fired.
Right.
He's interviewed for a bunch of other jobs since then, and nobody hired him.
Right. I mean, you're making a great point, Craig, and I wish I could have more time. I wish I could have more time to give you my answer, but I know you have other callers. I'm going to just say this. Mark Jackson has a stellar reputation, and he knows the game of basketball. And I think that the point guard position, which we're deficient in, don't forget, he actually was the reason Stern became the player he became. He was at the origin of that. So I think there's something to be said about that you can't overlook.
No, it's always my retort with Jackson, which is to say, I think Mark Wood did a lot of good stuff. I also think that firing him and going to Steve Kerr was the perfect 1-2 combination to unlock the Warriors for what they became. I think it's interesting, but when it comes to things that scare me, a guy that hasn't coached in a decade, that tells me something.
And the game is so different
for
now.
Sure,
right.
For sure. And Melo, I appreciate the call. Please don't make it your last, even though it was your first. Much appreciated. You listening and calling in. I think that with Keefe, there's going to be questions, but your options are always, you can get a guy who's never done it before, or you can get a guy who was fired. 98% of the time, that's what we're talking about. Sometimes the guys get fired because ownership and general managers and players screwed them over, and they're actually good coaches. That happens all the time in this league. But I just think that it's to look at one archetype and be hey, I don't know, because this, I can point you examples of this kind of coach that have succeeded and this kind of coach that have failed. Wes Unseld didn't work here. Highly touted assistant. Again, Mark Daigneault in Oklahoma City, coach of the year, 1 seed. Nick Nurse won a title in Toronto. And then, by the way, he was the guy who got fired. He's been both, because that's how you got to start. Eventually, every successful coach was at one point an assistant who had never done it before, unless you're like J.J. Redick, you get hired out of a broadcast booth.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.